32 degrees here a couple nights ago and we were all freezing. So
Yeah.
Wow. Amazing. Well, good job. Ulaanbaatar, very cold. Number 6. Which of the following statements is not true about Mongolian nomads? They use modern technology such as mobile phones. They are highly self-reliant and hardy people. They have diverse streams of income, and they are very hospitable. So which one of these is not true?
Well, I'm going to say that it is true that they are self-reliant and hardy and hospitable. Those feel like maybe a little too qualitative to say for sure, but yeah, I feel like that should be true.
In general, yeah.
And like my instinct is that yes, they use modern technology such as mobile phones, and so maybe they don't have diverse streams of income because it's all herding and livestock based still. Is that? I'm gonna go for
no. That's super very good thought process. Very good. Reducing things down to what you think is the right answer. And that's right. They don't have diverse streams of income. And you're totally right. They use modern technology. I've seen like satellite dishes outside of their traditional nomadic gers. So definitely modern technology, but you're right. Not a diverse stream of income because that's kind of all they have is their livestock. And I think Tumko will talk a lot more about ways that Mongolian nomads can diversify their streams of income in order to be more economically sturdy. All right, so number 7, which of the following statements is true? So we're going for true this time. Mongolia is home to the world's top quality cashmere. Increasing global cashmere sales are benefiting Mongolian herders. And C, herders are raising more goats for cashmere revenue. Or D, all of the above. All of those statements are true.
I feel like this feels like a diversification of income in the future that might be good for people. I'm going to go D.
All of the above is always a good option. You're right. Yes, all of the above. All of those things are true. And again, yeah, good diversification.
I can hear some tappy taps of your dogs being excited about me winning trivia.
They're so excited about cashmere that they are currently having a fight about it on the couch. Yeah, it is what it is, folks. Working from home, hosting from home. It is what it is. Number 8. How many heads of livestock does Mongolia have? Remember, lots of livestock, regardless of what you choose. This is lots of livestock. A, 3 million, B, 20 million, C, 70 million, or D, 120 million heads of livestock.
I feel like I have it stuck in my brain for some reason that there are 3 million humans in Mongolia-ish.
I think that's a good average amount of people in Mongolia today, yes.
So if I choose B, that's still like 7 times as many animals as people, but people have a lot more than 7 animals.
Yeah.
70 just seems like a whole lot. I'm gonna go B.
Oh,
no.
C, 70 million. That's crazy.
Animals, that's amazing.
I know. And I think, again, Tumko will talk about how that is a lot, maybe too many, right? All right, so you're doing so good. We're on to question 9.
Okay.
Question 9. What percentage of Mongolia's total land has forest cover? Is it A, not very much, 7%, B, 23% forest, C, 50%, or D, 89% forest cover? And maybe you can use the picture we've got included here.
Like any country having 89% sounds
like a lot.
Sounds cray to me. And like even the US is lower, around 20. I'm gonna go 7 because it seems like it's kind of more like grasslandy.
Yeah, I think that steppe and grassland is definitely their primary. Plus, they've got part of the Gobi Desert, so you're right. 7%, not a whole lot of trees. Yeah, total land forest cover, 7%. And then last question, are you ready? Which of the following?
Sorry. The little picture in the coat. Okay.
And this is Tumko. He's so much more awesome now, right? Because he's holding this baby goat.
Oh man.
I love it. All right, now that we're past the picture and how adorable it is, okay. Question 10.
Slow down. Yeah.
I know. Which of the following is not true? A, that water levels in rivers are restorable. B, that deforestation is irreversible. C, that pasture land overgrazing is mitigable. Or D, that cultures are revivable.
So I think that 3 out of these 4 are saying that we can make a change, and 1 is saying we can't. And so I'm going to say it's not true that we cannot change our future. So I'm going to say B is not true.
Sound reasoning. You're right. And I think that, again, we're going to learn so much more about this tonight, which is why this lecture is so exciting and awesome, to learn more about how Mongolia is able to reverse some things, right? Use grassroots conservation to reverse what's been going on. So
every country needs to learn how to maybe reverse some trajectories. So I'm excited to hear this.
Yeah, I'm hoping that we can take this inspiration from Mongolia also and use it here in the Pacific Northwest and beyond. We all need more community conservation for sure.
Yeah.
Great. You did awesome. Congrats.
Thanks for having me.
Did Lou do better than you or worse?
Oh, he lost. Yeah, he's definitely taking out the trash today. So
perfect.
My dog is doing some chores.
Love to hear it. All right. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I hope you learned something. And yeah, we'll check in with you later.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. All right, everybody. Thank you for playing trivia with us. I hope you learned something. I hope you don't have to take out the trash tonight. And now I'd like to take a moment to introduce our amazing speaker. So Tumurkhuu Tumko Davaakhuu joined Portland Audubon in 2019 as the Chief Operating Officer after serving as the CEO and Board Director of Arid Bank in Mongolia for 12 years. Tumko is a co-founder and chairperson of Spirit Mongolia, which is a community-based conservation nonprofit that manages 137,000 hectares of legal protected area in Mongolia. Tumko is also a co-founder of another nonprofit called the Achilles International Mongolia, which is about running. He also serves as the national coordinator of the UN's Environment Sustainable Finance Roadmap Project and is chairman of the Mongolian Sustainable Finance Association and vice president of the Mongolian Bankers Association. In 2018, Tumko made a decision to leave banking and devote his time to conservation full-time. To learn the ropes of conservation from an experienced grassroots organization that has successfully advanced their mission for over a century, he came to Portland. Tumko studied leadership decision-making at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, earned his MBA in financial management at Pace University, and got his BA in applied linguistics at Arkhangai University. In his free time, he enjoys going camping and going on mountaineering trips, running, and spending time with his family and friends. Thanks so much for being here, Tumko, and take it away.
Mongolia is a landlocked country in Northeast Asia, bordering China to the south and Russia to the north. The total territory area of the country is 610,740 square miles, and it is the 18th largest country in the world. Its average altitude is 1,580 meters above sea level, and is known as the Land of the Blue Sky, as it has over 260 sunny days a year. The average summer temperature is over 20 degrees Celsius, and the average winter temperature is negative 26 degrees. The population is 3 million, making it the most sparsely populated nation in the world, with only 4.3 people per square mile. The official language is Mongolian, and the main religion is Tibetan Buddhism. Mongolia is the country of Genghis Khan, who founded the largest empire in history. It is home to the world's last nomads. 30% of its people herd over 50 million animals in the pasture lands. Its most attractive and biggest event is the Natam Festival, which is held July 11th through the 13th. and whose main three games are wrestling, horse racing, and archery. All provinces and towns celebrate the Naadam festival at the same time, and there are about 20,000 wrestlers and 160,000 horses to race. Mongolia is home to wrestling, national wrestlers, sumo champions, and Olympic champions. Mongolia is horseman country, and there are more horses than humans. Genghis Khan's statue is the largest mounted statue in the world. Mongolia has a high diversity of natural features, including high snow-topped mountains, vast steppes, the Great Gobi Desert, clear lakes and rivers, and abundant wildlife. The Gobi Desert is Asia's largest desert, and the first dinosaur eggs were discovered there in 1922. The capital Ulaanbaatar is well developed and replete with modern amenities. Its population is around 1.3 million. Mongolia is a democratic country and has had a parliament government since 1990, maintaining relations with 166 countries. Mongolia has one of the fastest growing economies, mainly consisting of mining, agriculture, and tourism. Mongolia is ranked 10th in the number of mining reserves throughout the world. It is also the world's second largest producer of cashmere goat's wool, behind only China. Mongolia is more than just the home of the Mongols and the great Genghis Khan. Here, the old meets the new in a wonderful confluence. Come visit the gorgeous, wondrous Mongolia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tumko. Thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you, OMSI,
by her phone,
for giving me this opportunity to share a bit of history and information about the nomadic community in Mongolia. So let me start out with a bit of background about what is Spirit Mongolia. Spirit Mongolia was established in 2014, so we're a very young conservation nonprofit, especially compared to a giant like Portland Audubon, where I'm working and learning a lot. This effort was really initiated based on the cry for help and request from the local herder families. And my connection with this community to start with is through my father. This gentleman sitting in the center here is my dad, and he is the fourth generation native from this Mogoin Gol area. And he was the first one to get a formal education, go to a city, and then come back. So I am the fifth generation, although I was born in the capital city. We frequently visited the area, especially in the summertime. So currently, Spirit Mongolia is purely volunteer and herder community based. We do not have any staffing because of financial constraints of a young conservation organization. And after some hard work and consistent effort, one major milestone we were very happy that we were able to achieve was securing the area under legal protected area status. So what that means is basically the government will not be able to issue any hazardous agricultural, manufacturing, mining licenses, to say the least. And the area of Mogoin Gol, literally in Mongolian translates to Snake River because of the shape of the river, is located about 470 kilometers from the capital city, which is here, Ulaanbaatar. And it ranks as the fourth province in the country in terms of forest cover. As it was revealed in the trivia, we do not have a lot of forest cover as a nation to begin with. We only have 7% forest cover as of now. And through our trial and error work, and I would like to think of myself as an accidental conservationist or an amateur conservationist. I do not have any formal training or expertise in conservation. When the community reached out to my father and I for help, basically the background was they had tried to initiate some activities and efforts to protect their environment, that their livestock and therefore their own livelihoods highly depend on, and it did not end well. They were overpowered and they lacked a bit of coordination and networking, and it actually resulted in a few of the members being threatened by fighting poachers and illegal woodloggers, and few of them actually ended up thrown in jail. So after that, my father and I were so far from conservation as a field of work. My father comes from military and intelligence background. All his life he did military work, and my training and work experience is from banking and finance. So we really took this on common sense and, foolish courage. But we did have some general problem solving or project management experience, and to see what was happening with the birthplace of my father, and then, just in general, what has been done to the environment, we could not leave it alone. So we started researching a bit and just reaching out to people who are in the know and with knowledge and expertise. And then slowly we started figuring out the path that we had to lay. And then after doing some on the grounds work with the nomads and making observations, we have come up with these three main components of our work that was needed here. And then, of course, when coming up with these models, we're always listening to the herder communities, and they are actually leading the process. So one is obviously livelihoods of local communities. And because, you know, in general, and then also from the trivia questions, Mongolian herders heavily rely on pasture lands from groundwater and from the environment itself in general, because that is their way of life. And that directly impacts positively and negatively the environment. And then the third factor, which we cannot ignore, is the policy and the government's intervention when things go too far. So with this model in mind, let's take a look at the first aspect, which is the people. Mongolian nomads, herders, to me personally, are some of the most hardened people that I've ever encountered. You saw the winter temperatures in the city in January. Actually, peak cold season is towards the end of January and February. And especially in the countryside with no shelter of buildings and higher mountains, in the steppes, the temperature dipped down to -50 and even lower in some years. So nomads survive all year round in these elements and dealing with nature one-on-one, and actually live in gairs that you saw in the trivia. And those are basically very light mobile structures with a single layer of felt as a covering. The hospitality may come from our traditional history, or with the fact that more practical fact of just having few people on a large piece of land. And then you long for others, and you would like to hear news from, near and far. And actually in the southern provinces where the South Gobi Desert is, you will literally offend families if you just drive by without stopping and saying hello. The expectation is for you to go in, even if there's nobody at home. Doors are never locked. And you're supposed to make yourself at home, treat yourself to whatever food that may be in the house, and actually wait for the hosts to come and carry on a conversation and even spend the night and be on your way the next morning. And because of this laid back, stress-free life, they do possess this enormous sense of grace. They're not dealing with the daily stresses that might be adding to, contemporary city living, for example, traffic congestion, just number of people, noise, light, air, water pollution. All those things do not exist in the countryside where these people live. And from the climate, perhaps animal husbandry or herding and livestock was selected over the years because of the cold climate. To do any agriculture, the soil is fairly dry. We do not have as much rain as Portland does, for example, so low precipitation and very short summers. So 3 months of summer, and then we do have 4 seasons. And historically, Mongolians are nomads, and dating back to Genghis Khan's era, they were conquerors and also travelers, and they would move with the whole settlement. So Mongolians were never really stationary in one place for a very long time. So this comes from the tradition and history, but it comes with some risk, especially when we look at it from today's perspective. The harsh climates bring a lot of risk. Actually, they can wipe out your entire herd in a matter of 2 or 3 weeks if the weather doesn't cooperate. We actually have a phenomenon called zot. It's extreme winter conditions when we have extreme amount of snowfall with freezing temperatures that covers all source of food for livestock. So they cannot dig out grass from under the ice and snow. And then they actually cannot get themselves out of the snow. So when that happens, people's wealth, which is livestock, can be gone. And that, unfortunately, in some cases causes displacement, and mainly due to economics. And then they move to larger cities for a different type of living. So the main source of living is, again, as you may guess, all associated with livestock and animals. So dairies, meat, animal skin, bones, wool, cashmere. The concept of circular economy or circular consumption is really in its true form in the countryside of Mongolia. I'm sure there are many other places in the world, but I have not seen as circular consumption as our nomads have in Mongolia. They do not throw anything out. They do not waste anything. They produce everything that they consume and use, including clothing. And then bartering is still very common. And in the actual rural countryside, use of credit cards or cash is very, very rare. So let's take a very brief visit to some historic moments for Mongolia. So this way of living dates back to, let's say, the easiest point in time that a lot of people know outside of Mongolia is the time of Genghis Khan's era. so which is the 1200s. They were still leading this same way of life. And then in 1921, Mongolia got freed from a 200-year-long colonization by the Qing dynasty. So with the help of the Russian Red Army of that time, Mongolia proclaimed its independence and sovereign state. So, and that introduced a centrally planned economy and socialism. And from 21 to 1990, 1990 is when the Soviet Union collapsed and the Berlin Wall coming down, all these socialist countries migrating to a free market economy and democracy. Same thing happened with Mongolia. And how that affected the herders and also non-herder Mongolians was a very abrupt change from, let's say, a very strong social service net of, well, healthcare, education being provided free of charge, high quality education and healthcare being provided free of charge and on equal terms to everyone. All of a sudden now, you need to worry about all the financial and household economics, and the nomadic herders are no exception. So that prompted great things, opening up our perspectives, opening up borders, but also it introduced some unintended consequences. So for example, we do have now 70 million heads of livestock to 3.3 million people. So each person actually has 20 animals. You know, they don't have each one, but including children, each person, you know, by this ratio has over 20 animals. And this is causing some serious environmental issues as well. And families now had to look at things through an economic lens, an economic filter. So that has some negative impact on traditions and cultures as well. More manual labor intensive traditions would be omitted and therefore get close to being forgotten. And just the fact, average monthly income in Mongolia currently stands at around $350 US. And you can imagine the country was socialist just 30 years ago. So we have not had a generation yet that is well-versed in financial planning or retirement planning. And there is not all that much disposable income floating around. So for efforts like this, for nomadic herders, charitable giving, donations are a very new concept. But thankfully, volunteering is really catching on, especially with the younger generation, ages, I would say, from 12 or 15 to all the way to 30 years old. Which is a great thing for nonprofits and organizations like us. And I mentioned migration earlier. So most of the herders, if not all of them, do not want to move from where they were born and where they live. They only move for schooling, and most of them come back, and in some cases due to economic displacement, and mostly due to harsh weather conditions that negatively impact their wealth and livestock. So moving on to the next component of our puzzle is the natural ecosystem. Mongolians were blessed with pristine nature, and then Mongolia does not have high occurrence of major natural disasters, such as earthquakes, hurricanes, floods. And traditionally, as I mentioned, the people's love and care for environment was dating back many centuries. And one fun fact is Boktam Mountain is only a few kilometers from the center of our capital city, was the second oldest national park officially recognized in the world. And Tobago Main Ridge Forest Reserve was declared only 2 years before that, although Mongolian scientists and historians would argue that, you know, this Bok Mountain was already proclaimed as a strictly protected area, even dating back in the 12th century. So land ownership is still quite strict. You can own 700 square meters of land if you are a Mongolian national, but a private individual, for free, one time in a lifetime. And if you are a business or a corporation, you cannot own land, you cannot buy land. You can only go into a contractual agreement with the government on a lease term. And here's a couple of examples how closely Mongolians and their life are knitted with nature. So the Mongolian ger that you see at the top is a structure that is actually just placed on the ground temporarily. A typical nomadic family moves from 3 to 4 times each year, just moving from fresh pasture lands to the next. Excuse me. So, and it does not, the design of the ger does not use any objects to disturb the earth. And very similar concept with the traditional Mongolian boots, which are actually quite commonly worn, especially in the countryside. Boots have upturned tip, not to kick and disturb earth, and have no heels. So, and some people jokingly state that also Mongolians maybe designed these shoes so that they can cover their tracks, because by looking at these tracks, you cannot tell one's direction of travel because it's just one flat rectangular track. So continuing on, a bit about the effect of climate change on Mongolia. Unfortunately, Mongolia is being disproportionately affected by climate change. Close to 80% of the total land is under some level of desertification, and the average annual temperature increase since the 1940s is 3 times the global average. And just in a span of around 18 to 19 years, Mongolia has lost 11% of its forest cover. But there's also human impact that's contributing to degradation of pasture lands. Overgrazing, as you can guess, is a major factor here. High climate risk caused people to think raising more and more is safer. So in a harsh climate, you may end up with, you know, partial herd rather than losing all. So that triggered this mentality of raising and more. I would say without a lot of detailed planning or rationale. And there's also economic incentive, in particularly associated with Kashmir. And in the ancient Mongolia or traditional Mongolian herding customs, there was an unwritten rule of herd balance. So Mongolians did not increase their goat composition in their herd structure above 30%. and then the rest could be sheep, cattle, etc. But now we have some families, many families, that raise only goats because of their cashmere value. And then why is raising goats is not so positive versus the other species is that goats are not very picky eaters. So they can go through a pasture land eating up and consuming berries, bushes, brushes, grass, tree branches, leaves, and then they're great climbers. So they can get to vegetation, get to herbs. So there's an intricate balance that needs to be established. And another human impact, this could be more common, is deforestation. One aspect is illegally logging wood for firewood. Mongolian government has taken some action on cracking down on liberal use of logging fees, logging. So that contributes. And I mentioned Arkhangai province, where our project is one of a handful of provinces out of 21 with some forest coverage. And then traditionally, Mongolians always gathered animal dung as fuel. So they would dry it over the summer, and then they would burn it all year round. And because of modern conveniences like chainsaws and trucks, now herders even, and people who live in close by urban centers can just drive up to a forest and prepare illegally firewood. And there's always also industrial and construction use of forests. And overgrazing actually impacts both of these and contributes to deforestation and also to a loss of groundwater. Overgrazing and animals consuming the vital vegetation that draws water from underground to surface have been wiped out by large herds. So that impacts the water level. And also, because of scarcity of food, now animals go into forests. Traditionally, we hear tales of herders saying that before, livestock never grazed into the forests because they were afraid of predators coming out of the forest. But now, in search of food, they're willing to travel into the forests. And then a couple of other factors that contribute to deforestation are pests and fires, which could be also common in other places of the world. And then we finally arrive to the last piece of the puzzle, which is policy and enforcement of regulations. So currently, on paper and theoretically, Mongolia has a robust framework of related legislation related to environment. And some of the major ones that impact our work is environmental protection law. This is an umbrella law encompassing many different aspects: law on wildlife, forest law, law on fauna, law on water use. So in terms of legislation, we are a fairly strong framework country, but obviously some of them need to move ahead with the times and get revised, depending on, on the circumstances that are arising. So on the picture here, you see some of our public education and awareness work. This is, in this particular sign is educating the public about the forest law and on illegal wood logging. And when we started out, we designed very friendly signs, you know, let's protect the forests together, let's not illegally log wood. And over time, we learned we needed to use some more direct messages. So, and we have these signs around our protected area in some urban centers as well. And as part of law enforcement, we partner with the local and also from the state, the law enforcement and court officials to crack down on these illegal activities. Poaching and in some cases the work occasionally can get slightly dangerous and involve some risk, especially if the herders are confronting violators directly on their own without the presence of officials. So, and currently the legislation does not allow nonprofit staff or local herders, even if the violation is on the grounds of their special protected area, they cannot detain people, they cannot confiscate, they cannot arrest. So all we can do is only take pictures and inform the authorities. So, and through some extended work that stretched out for about 4 years, I believe, we were able, in collaboration with other organizations, to add an amendment in the law that allows nonprofits, conservation nonprofits, to train and pass a state exam for their members so that they can become rangers and state inspectors. But the government will give them the right and privilege, but will not fund them. So they won't get federal or state payroll. So the organization needs to raise money through its operations to fund it. So we have been preparing and training a handful of our members, but they're not active yet because of financial constraints. So after trial and error and common sense problem solving kind of attitude, we have realized in that model, one leverage point of intervention was a coordinated effort, for example, organizations like Spirit Mongolia, to connect and coordinate these three areas. So for the community, what type of work is needed and what type of efforts have we been experimenting with is really putting the families into a coordinated effort so that the prior lessons learned do not repeat themselves. So being overpowered by corrupt officials, being threatened by poachers and things like this. So an empowerment of the indigenous communities. I mentioned earlier that everything we do and decide comes from the communities themselves. And we only play a role of supporting and creating networks and connections. So in the photo, you see a member, the most active member from Spirit Mongolia being handed the official seal and registration of the organization. So she is our Secretary General of the organization. So that empowerment goes a long way in collaboration with proper education. So we do conduct by inviting experts and also enrolling our members into international conservation organizations such as the Wildlife Conservation Society, the Nature Conservancy, the WWF, Zoological Society of London. So we do try to enroll our members into their training so that they get more understanding of what is possible near their home. And then we arrange study tours with buddy organizations in other parts of the region. So community, another aspect of the community benefits is piloting and doing trial and error with some sustainable and conservation compatible sources of revenue and employment potentials. So here you can see as a nonprofit organization, conservation nonprofit organization, we do not have the legal right to do any forest management activities, such as thinning, cleaning of the forest. So all we can do is to clean fallen dead woods, and then using the forest cleaning debris, we started producing biochar, and through a very locally brewed method using a 200-liter barrel through a process called pyrolysis. And then this is what herders can do, and they can collect the debris while they're tending to their livestock in the pastures. And also this region, Arkhangai, is very well known for its dairy products, because Arkhangai has the largest head count of yaks, the creamiest and rich organic dairies come from this specific region. So also another effort in trying to replace the livestock dependent way of life, which in turn is negative if done at this extent of 70 million heads of livestock to the environment. We are also piloting sustainable tourism. So when we look at the factors or inputs, we do have a beautiful nature and one of the last remaining authentic nomadic cultures and very hospitable community of herders. So it just shows natural to have more interaction with visitors outside of Mongolia. And that way, the herders are exposed to new cultures, things outside of their world. So, and then they actually get to learn new phrases, new languages. So one of the gentlemen you saw on a horseback with another horse next to him was one of our members who was a well-known poacher in the area before we started this work. So we asked him to actually guide. He used to guide poachers for money. So instead, we gave him a couple of groups of photographers, nature photographers. So all of a sudden, he realized he was making a lot more money and then not feeling bad about the way he was making money. Now he's become one of our most active members. And then I'll show you in the next slides what he actually does now. So these are some of the end results of our trial products. So we also help our members find marketplaces, access to markets. We go and speak to supermarket chains, retail stores to consider these products. And here you see on the very left, they participate in the National Conservation Organization Forum that is held in the capital city. And for a lot of them, it was the very first time to be in the capital city. And their hard work was recognized by the government, and they received, in this case, a #2 prize for the best conservation organization in the country. So here on the right, you see the abundant dairy products that our herders produced, and displaying it at a festival dedicated to the Lunar New Year celebrations, where the moss dairies are eaten by all Mongolians. So another activity that we started and have been carrying on for the last 5-6 years is establishment of a tree nursery. So when trees are at a certain height, animals do not graze on those. So we established this nursery to grow the trees to a certain height, and we replant them in the forest. And our herder communities have shifts and take turns to water and mend the fences. And I was mentioning to some of my colleagues at Audubon, when we were putting up some split rail fencing, that in Mongolia, I wish we could get away with such fences in Mongolia, because here in Portland, we're not dealing with livestock jumping over or climbing between the posts. So here, the oversight and monitoring, unfortunately, has to be a bit more rigorous. And then another aspect that we actually started out with when we started this whole movement was law enforcement, and making our presence known by having a lot of law enforcement officers and actually confiscating and putting a few violators, repeat offenders in prison for a few weeks. So, and the local government and law enforcement officers cooperate very well, which we're very grateful to. And then quarterly, we publish an awareness piece in the local newspaper, so that people, because the communities are small, you can imagine, total population of 3.3 million. In a rural area like this, the population is even smaller. So if you get spread the word, you can get some quick results. And poaching is still a big problem in Mongolia. And on the left, you see here marmots. And marmots, as thought to be ecosystem engineers, are very, very valuable to steppes like we have in Mongolia. And due to their high fur value, exported high value, mostly through the Chinese border to the south, they were poached to extinction. So with the exception of a couple of temples in their protected areas, Mongolia did not have any marmots for the last decade and a half. So in our area was no exception. So when we started doing this work, we reintroduced marmots with help from our government environmental agency. And the person that you see the clothing or dead of is that poacher, former poacher, and our most active member now. He is in charge of protecting our marmots from poachers, basically from his former friends, and then counting and learning the behavior of the animal. And our last count was just in the fall of last year, 2020, just a few months ago. And our approximate count is at 230. So we're very, very happy that this generation, that marmots adopted the new place, and they're settling in quite well. And in some cases, in harsh climate conditions, weather conditions, wildlife, it's common for wildlife to come close to people and actually graze together with wildlife. And in this case, on the right, you see a deer coming to us because it was chased by wolves. So it spent a couple of nights with us. We fed him, and then he was on his way. So our key goals and projects that are ongoing, and some of them that are upcoming, and our common sense, or my common sense, and amateur conservation efforts are reaching their limits. And for projects like groundwater restoration and doing development work for conservation and doing communications work specific to conservation, now we're hitting that phase where we need more and more scientific experts, science experts, and also experts with actual track record and experience, so that we can avoid delays and mistakes, especially when we're dealing with scarce to absent financial capacities. So pasture management is a major thing. And then what it really boils down to is creating replacement sources of revenue for the local communities so that they can start reducing their herd size. And this is very untraditional and unheard of to them. So we did a survey, and the questions were, why do you keep increasing your herd size? And a lot of them do not have the intent to. And in good weather conditions, animals reproduce, animals grow, and herd sizes grow. And without a very stable and strong outlet, for example, exports of meat and animal products, they just keep growing. So we asked them, if we were able to replace your environmentally hazardous sources of revenue with more conservation compatible or environmentally friendly sources of revenue, such as working as contractors for the ecotourism and having a job at a tourist facility or a tourist camp that is set up by the nonprofit, would you be willing to reduce your herd size? And they would like to. And the sad reality that could be true in a lot of different countries, that traditional, especially things like farming, agriculture, and animal husbandry tend to just stay with the older generation, and the younger generation would like to move into a larger city and then get a more exciting job. So, but in this case, because there are not enough jobs, people go into the city. So they would love the opportunity to get rid of that climate risk and then have a bit more time to their kids, to tend to their health and education. So it's a very welcome initiative that is being developed as we speak. So, and then we're always welcoming and reaching out to volunteers with expertise to help us move forward to the next phase of our development. And this concludes the information that I wanted to share with you. And by the way, that's a Snake River that you see in the background. And believe it or not, in some years, this river now goes completely dry. And in that case, the herder communities have to move long distances to find a spot that is not claimed by others from their region. And these are some of our contact details. And I would like to, again, thank everyone for making the time late in the night and showing interest in our work. Thank you very much.
Hey, Tumko, thank you so much for that great lecture on Mongolia and the conservation efforts that are going on. I feel like we have talked a lot about this, and still listening to you talk, I learned more, and so did my dog, who's also very excited about learning about conservation in Mongolia. So, like I said at the beginning, Mel and I have been collecting all of the questions that folks have been asking while you were doing your lecture. And so I want to jump right in if you're ready to answer some questions from the audience.
I'm ready.
Yeah. So the first one, which, you know, I think is something that's been on all of our minds as we've listened to you talk, like, what are some ways that people, especially us being in the United States, can help with what's going on in Mongolia, with the grassroots conservation efforts, but then also just like, you know, with the environmental impact in general?
Yeah, I mean, there is actually quite a lot that people can do, and no effort, no help is too small. So starting from volunteering, you know, like I mentioned, we don't have any staff people. And then with the exception of one or two people, and myself and my father, everyone else is a nomadic herder. So let's say starting from research and making connections, finding experts, you know. So experts who are willing to come out to Mongolia, or even remotely, especially during this pandemic, you know, willing to reach out and just help with expertise. For example, I mentioned groundwater restoration. I have never done this work. I do not have the expertise. So we really need, for example, an expert in that field. And communications. And you'll see, if you follow the link that I shared, the website is very, very amateur. You know, it was put together by a volunteer who's not an IT or website builder. So, but we have something. We have something to share the information through. So, you know, all kinds of skill sets can be used in spreading the word, and obviously funding is a big aspect in any operation, especially in conservation. A charitable giving is always great support.
And you know, it's interesting that you say that, because one of the other questions that's on my list here is Spirit Mongolia a U.S. recognized charity, and or are there just ways for people who are here in the U.S. to donate to help with those efforts?
That's a great question. Spirit Mongolia is not yet registered in the U.S., but seeing the complications of transacting donations and payments, and Jen, you experienced it firsthand by acquiring exhibits for the museum.
Yes, definitely exchanging money with Mongolia is a process.
Yeah. So we're looking into it now, but before that happens, we do have a way through these charitable fundraising platforms, international, or I think they are US, like Indiegogo. Actually, the website has a link that is directly linked, so it can accept US payments here.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that a couple people were definitely interested in ways that they could help. My next question, if I can see my list with my dog in front of me, is, are there certain livestock that affect the environment more? So, you know, of those kind of 5 main livestock, is there one that has a bigger environmental impact, or is it more that it's just, you know, so many livestock in general just having that combined effect on the environment?
Yeah. So for pastures, to our knowledge, goats are the most hazardous. And then, but if you think about emissions, then it's cattle.
Yeah, definitely with the methane emissions.
Yes, and we have about over 30 million sheep, around 30 million goats, and then the remaining types of livestock really drop low. So about 4 million horses and around 4 million cattle, and then just about 500,000 of camels.
Wow.
So we do have cattle, but we don't have as many as goats or sheep.
Sure. Wow, that's just so many. I mean, I think the trivia question was what, 70 million total heads of livestock. It's just, yeah, that is insane.
Yeah.
So another question that we have is working in ecotourism compatible with the migratory nomadic lifestyle?
Yes, we looked into it, and it actually works quite well. And so nowadays, most families do not travel great distances anymore. So they will be traveling, let's say, at most 5 to 10 kilometers.
Mm-hmm.
And then part of the experimental sustainable tourism we did, people that we hosted then actually preferred to stay with the families.
Mm.
So yeah, and then normally the tourist activities happen in summertime.
Sure.
Then in summertime, nomads are stationary in their summer location.
Right. Is it more that the nomadic families are kind of moving with seasons? So, you know, they move to a summer range and they stay, and then they move to a winter range and stay, as opposed to maybe, you know, like, I don't know, I think in my mind, I immediately think, oh, they're nomadic, they must be moving like every other day, but that's probably not true.
No, they move with the seasons.
Right.
So in winter, they move in search of shelter from strong winds and snowstorms. So they normally have a winter place with some structure sometimes. Just a very simple wooden shelter where they can place their newborn animals in March. So normally they have northwestern cover behind because we have northwestern winds.
Yeah.
And, animals in winter do not graze as far as they do in summertime.
Yeah, and I imagine that they must be adapted to not eating quite as much. There's just so much snow and so much harsh conditions.
Right. And you'll notice livestock in the autumn time are the biggest and the bulkiest. They're preparing for that winter.
Yeah, almost like hibernation. Not quite hibernation, but kind of.
Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy. So one of the other questions, we've gotten a lot of questions about like what kind of programs are currently, you know, available in Mongolia. And one was, is there like a policy or a program besides the coal ban that can help mitigate some of the urban air issues?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's a very specific policy question, so it's okay if you don't know.
Yes. I think the person who asked the question is very knowledgeable.
They must be.
Recent issues in Mongolia. Yes, air pollution in urban centers is a major issue.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, part of the reason I mentioned I moved out here in search of conservation knowledge and experience, but also for healthier climate for my family.
Yeah.
And for at least a decade, I would say, we had very poor air quality in urban centers in Mongolia, most cities. And now it really took a toll. And just last year, the Mongolian government finally passed the equivalent of the Clean Air Act.
Mm.
And they did ban the burning of raw coal.
Mm-hmm.
because burning of raw coal was causing the air pollution. And Mongolia ranks as the second country, I think, in terms of coal deposits.
Wow.
So we have a lot of it,
Yeah.
and obviously then it's the cheapest source of fuel.
Sure.
So if you let market economy play itself out, you know, these kind of things happen. So government fortunately intervened, and the air quality is much improved now.
That's good. Yeah, I can imagine that kind of that unregulated area would be really, yeah, it would result in really poor air quality. Another question specifically about like specific programs, but this one about reforestation. So are there any current programs that are working on reforestation? And you know, what kind of help is needed to like study and implement reforestation of forests in Mongolia?
So we have tried on our own, and basically these were done to prove our point for foundations that we're reaching out to, and for grant purposes to demonstrate. So we experimented with something called fencing.
Mm-hmm.
And as the name suggests, you just build a fence around it.
Sure, that makes sense.
certain section of the forest, and also a certain section of the river.
Yeah.
So that there's no human or animal traffic.
I was going to ask if the fence was meant to keep the humans out or the animals, or both.
Both.
Yeah.
Yeah, but more for the animals. And the fencing is not very large, so that it restricts wildlife movement. It's just a very small segment of the forest. And so with the results of that, and we're going into our second year of that experiment. So after the second year is over, we will prepare a report, and then we will work to expand the work.
Yeah. Well, I hope it's successful, because that sounds like something that that doesn't take a whole lot. You know, if it's just a fence, and that proves to be really effective at keeping livestock and making sure that, you know, things are successful, then that's a really nice solution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but if we think about the total area that we have under protection, it's fairly big. So to try to fence the overall area would be cost prohibitive.
Right.
Yeah. So again, if there are any experts with you know, expertise and experience, we'll be happy to get their take and, you know, suggestions on this work.
Yeah, definitely. Sounds like anybody who's willing to volunteer, I think, would be welcome into Spirit Mongolia.
Absolutely.
Another question. In some developing countries, or in many countries across the world, some people do illegal things like logging or poaching to help pay for day-to-day life, or even for things as serious as healthcare. And this person is wondering if that's the case in Mongolia, if you know, this illegal logging and illegal poaching and some of the things that you're seeing in Mongolia, is that, you know, not only a result of needing to just live day to day, but also like to pay for emergencies or just things that they need for their family.
So, for example, let's compare this to ivory. I want to say that we do not have something as popular as ivory that can have high market value. So in case of marmots, that was the case, but I do not think it was to actually survive. It was more to make a quick buck.
Right.
And easy money.
That's interesting. So then that means, like, I guess in my mind, that showing people, like you've been saying, showing people the alternatives, not only like the ramifications of what they're doing, but the alternatives that they can then implement in order to make additional money seems like that would be really popular. Like if people understand what they're doing, then they could make the change, and it might be a little bit easier if they're not living kind of day to day or trying to survive, that they might be able to change their ways.
That's right. That's right. And that is why this more coordinated effort comes into the picture. Just on their own, like chopping down a single tree, shooting a single marmot, people can always say, well, the nature has an abundance of these things.
Sure, it was just one tree.
Yeah, it's not going to hurt. And once you aggregate these thoughts, it adds up. And so without the coordinated effort and peer pressure, this more team effort, it's difficult to single out individual people and try to make, talk sense into them.
Sure. We have a much more lighthearted question for you, because I feel like the last few I've asked you are very, very heavy. What's that tent behind you in your virtual background? Is that some sort of shelter, or what you got there?
It's literally a tent.
Mm-hmm.
And as the Mongolian ger, the design is similar. It's a very large piece of fabric.
Mm-hmm.
And it has only 3 pieces of wood, 2 posts and 1 horizontal piece.
Wow.
That's it. And Mongolians normally use this when they are preparing food for the livestock for the winter.
Mm.
So they would be cutting grass, and then they would basically camp out in such tents for a month or so.
So it's an even more mobile tent, even more mobile than a ger.
Yes.
So I know that one thing, I guess this is less permanent, so maybe I'm answering my own question, but I know that one specific design aspect of a ger is that, it has that center pole with the vent at the top so that you can have a stove in the middle. This doesn't have that. So are they cooking in the open air?
Yes, they actually place the stove outside. Huh. Let's see if it has one. No,
that sounds cold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In summertime, it's very common for Mongolian families to place their stove outside their ger.
Even when you have a ger, you still place your stove outside?
Correct. Because it gets too hot inside.
See, in the trivia, I just learned that sometimes in January, it's like negative 40 degrees Celsius in the morning. I think I'd want it to be really warm.
Yeah. And then Mongolian ger serves as, as many different things. And one of the functions is a refrigerator.
Oh.
When the felt is lifted around the perimeter, the breeze, there's a through breeze. And then, for example, the clotted cream is left under the bed in the cool wind to cool off and form that crust. But if you keep cooking inside and making hot fire, it can, mess things up. So
yeah. I imagine when your diet's pretty dairy based with a lot of cheese and cream, that maybe you would want it to stay a little cold. Oh, that's funny. I never knew that. But I guess when you have a tent with felt, you can totally just regulate how much cold is coming in. Cool. So one other question that we got in that I have written down here is part of the solution, the solution of, improving conservation efforts and the environmental impact in Mongolia, to incentivize people to move out of ger districts. I think this person was pointing out that, you have the cities, and then you kind of have these outskirts of people still living in gers, not really in the countryside, not really in the city. And as one way, would it be helpful to incentivize people to continue to live nomadically out in the countryside as opposed to kind of in those areas?
Yeah. Reversing the migration is a slightly larger issue that involves a lot of macro problem solving. So what ended up giving us this overpopulation in the capital city, where over 50% of the country resides, is lack of development or proportionate development, lack of proportionate development outside of the capital city. Mm-hmm. So not enough jobs, and for very smaller communities, schools will close down because government cannot support the funding. So parents have no choice but to move. And then the harsh climates as well. So how the Gare district was formed is from all these families moving in from outside of the capital city, desperate to survive when these harsh winter conditions take place, right. And in search of jobs. So sending, incentivizing them, the incentives are there. There are some very well-to-do herders in Mongolia with thousands of livestock, and they actually have employees as herders. Some of them do not herd anymore directly. So there is incentive, but it is very, very hard work.
Sure.
But I think it's parallel to a lot of farming and agricultural and lifestyles around the world. You have to get up at 4:30 in the morning, and you're always doing something, always moving, lifting things, a lot of physical work. But they are the most fit and healthy people.
Hey, that is, you see, built-in exercise routine all day long.
Yeah.
Yeah. Someone just asked if there's something in Mongolia equivalent to the U.S. National Park System. And I don't know, I know that you were talking about Spirit Mongolia having secured legally protected areas. Is that something similar? Is that more like a state park?
It is similar. So it is one level below the national park level. So to have an area declared as a national park, the approval goes through the parliament. Mm-hmm. So we did not want to wait that long, because it takes decades sometimes.
Right.
So we went for the lower option, which is a legal protected area. So it is decided on a local government basis.
Okay.
So we engaged the local government, and of course the Citizens Council had to meet, and there's a lot of hoops to jump through. But Bogtang Mountain, I was mentioning about, that was declared in 1778, is a national park. So the equivalent, and actually, if you go into IUCN's website,
okay,
they actually list the oldest. I think they'll list Tobago, and then Bogtang Mountain, and then I think Yosemite was the first in the U.S., and then it comes in at around 1872 or so. So I think they're on the equivalency in terms of status.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Awesome. Well, national parks are my favorite thing to do in the U.S., so I would love to do that in Mongolia too, because you have more than convinced me that I would love to visit Mongolia and see all of these beautiful places you talk about.
Sometimes I convince myself to be there. It's a wonderful place.
Yeah. My favorite thing, and we've talked about this before, but listening to your lecture was to hear your story again about how it's like required that if you pass a nomadic gare that you have to go in. Mm-hmm. There's no passing by. You got to go in. You got to talk. You got to eat some food, and it's just such a charitable and welcoming community. Really refreshing. Yeah. We got a few more questions coming in. This one is about engagement in Mongolia's environmental struggle and whether or not kind of the economic class that you're a part of determines your engagement. So are people from lower or higher economic classes more likely to be involved in something like Spirit Mongolia? Like, is it more that, you know, that there's people from both levels, you know, like people who are really interested in donating and then people on like kind of the ground level, or is there a disparity between it?
I think this trend could be just more human related rather than just Mongolian, right? So if you are worried about putting food on the table the next day, charity or conservation are lower on your priority list.
Sure.
So in a similar fashion, I think in Mongolia, if you are somewhat secure in terms of your basic human needs, you know, in terms of, let's say, Maslow's pyramid, you have food, you have shelter, you have clothing, and then maybe perhaps then, but there are exceptions when if you are directly impacted by the ill effects. For example, air pollution is on everybody's mind. People are very active about it, but in some developing countries, you may not notice it. You know, the worst air pollution could be just from cars. So, we don't have that generation that has responsibly saved up wealth or accumulated wealth, because we're only 30 years into this new system. And I think my generation or the one after me will be, because for example, the concept of retirement planning is very, very rare to see people practicing, because there is not enough to spare to put away.
Yeah.
Right? So I think we have maybe a generation or two until we get to that charitable giving like we see in more developed economies.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm interested, you know, and maybe it's after our lifetimes, but I'm interested to see how that continues to grow. One more question, bringing it back to your time at the Portland Audubon. Someone is wondering what brought you to Portland and working at Portland Audubon, and yeah, and just being in the US in general.
Yes, we as a family had lived in the US once before, but that was many years ago, and it was on the East Coast, and I was doing banking work. But this time we wanted to achieve two things. One, for me, I wanted to learn. My wife and I both were at the stage in our lives that we wanted to do something that we are passionate about, rather than doing something that makes a living. Yeah. So for me, that was conservation. We were looking at some of the Scandinavian countries. We're looking at Norway. We're looking at Sweden. And then we had a friend who is American and from Portland, but lives in Mongolia and is a good friend of mine. And he was a big ambassador for Portland. And I had visited Portland on my previous banking work once before. I actually came to have a meeting with Amqua Bank here because the CEO was very popular, and then the way they were, you know, framing their philosophy, they were getting, you know, many visitors, I think, around the world. So I was one of those people, and then I got to see Portland, and I really enjoyed it. it was in the midst of the forest and nature, and I saw the food trucks, all these great things, and it wasn't too big, it wasn't too small.
Yeah.
But still a very sophisticated culture. And most of all, I learned then that Portland was one of the most environmentally conscious cities in the world. So very clean transportation fleets, drinking water sources are very impressive. So there were a list of things. And so after arriving in Portland, we still went to see a couple of other cities in California. And we liked Portland much more. And I reached out I just Googled conservation nonprofits in Portland. And Portland Audubon came up, and I reached out to volunteer, actually. And my good colleague now, Vicky Medley, the volunteer manager, was very responsive. She responded immediately, and she said, would you like to come in and, let's talk about what you're willing to do, what you like to do. And she said, you know what, we may have a position opening up. And then I was very lucky. Like I said, I don't have any formal conservation background, but Portland Audubon happened to need someone with finance and operations experience. And I wanted to learn about conservation, and what better place to learn from than Portland Audubon. And what Portland Audubon has achieved is incredible. It started out as a volunteer-based organization, no staff, very similar to how we are now. And then started from a very local, very specific place, but actually did such pioneering, cutting edge work that is recognized in the nation, maybe internationally. So they do conservation work all across the state of Oregon. And it's just a blessing to be around my colleagues at Portland Audubon.
That's great. And I know, we've talked about this before, but it's so great that you get to be a part of this kind of fledgling, very young nonprofit in Mongolia that hopefully over generations and many years will grow into something that is just as powerful and influential and beneficial to the environment as Portland Audubon. And from what I've heard, it sounds like y'all are well on your way. So hopefully before long, you'll have a whole staff and a whole slew of volunteers across Mongolia.
Yeah. The idea to borrow inspiration is to cheat a little bit, and avoid some of the mistakes that were previously made, and maybe do something that was done in 100 years, maybe in 80 years.
Yeah, right. I know. Don't need to reinvent the wheel.
Exactly. Awesome.
Well, hey, Tumko, thank you so much. I think that's all the questions that we have for you. And it's about all of the time we have for tonight. So thank you again so much for that awesome lecture. Thank you to everybody that asked questions and participated in trivia. We hope you enjoyed the evening. So, yay. So if you would like to watch this video again, or if you would like to share it with your friends, go ahead and check out the video section on OMSI's Facebook page or our YouTube channel. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. There you'll get updates on future events and more inspiring content from OMSI. And I know I mentioned this at the beginning, but please consider supporting Science Pub, making a donation via the Facebook donate button, or you can visit omsi.edu/donate. And of course, join us for our next lecture that's happening in 2 weeks on February 2nd with Clyde Ford. He watched his father struggle against racism as the first Black software engineer in America. Ford shows how the issues his father encountered are still present in high-tech technology today, and what concerned citizens must do to support and advocate for human and civil rights in the modern technological age. So once again, thank you so much to our partner Celestream for helping make tonight's event awesome and possible. And as always, you can get more information on our website at omsi.edu. Thanks so much, everyone. Thank you again, Tumko. Have a great night.